What is up, guys? This is Matt Cox back with another episode of the Saustown Investor Podcast, our second ever with a video feed, playing around with these different backgrounds. If you guys have ever wondered what a little downtown Manhattan apartment looks like, now you know. So thank you for joining us today. I appreciate all the feedback we've gotten on the first few pods, the comments, and people texting with ideas and stuff. I love it. Reach out anytime you feel like it. Speaking of that, I had a buddy who had an idea, who had a question that we're going to use for this podcast episode. He asked, how do you make the numbers work on rental properties in this interest rate environment? So for purposes of this episode, we're going to talk about Oregon, which is, of course, where I invest. If you go to the Midwest or parts of the South, the cheaper markets, of course, numbers are going to play out differently. But for purposes of this episode, I'm going to talk about Oregon, where I invest, and which is a pretty expensive market. So when I first started buying stuff, started buying at scale back in 2020, interest rates were on non-owner occupies were between 3 and 4%. On owner occupies, people were going even under 3%. At the same time, housing prices weren't quite as high. So you had a low interest rate environment and a historically low interest rate environment. And then you had housing prices that aren't as high as they are today. They certainly were not cheap, but they were not at the level they are today. So that made the costs of owning a home much lower. At that time, I would buy, single family homes, duplexes, whatever. I'd usually buy off market and, get the house for a little bit below market price. But at that time, you could go on the MLS and buy at market value, and you could cash flow on a rental property because interest rates were so low and your monthly payment was so low. So fast forward to now here in 2025, where interest rates are stubbornly sticking right around 7%. We got as high as 8. At one point we dipped down to 6, but it doesn't seem like they're gonna go back. I could see them dipping to 6 or 5.5, but it's hard to see a world where they're going back to where they were in the 3s. So the question is, how do we make the numbers work on rentals in this environment? So there's a couple answers here. I'll dive in on kind of the first strategy or the first way that we make this happen. And that is through the use of creative finance. There's a million videos online on YouTube if you want to do a deep dive on what that looks like. But I'm going to focus on two main strategies today. The first one is buying subject to, and the second one is around buying using seller finance. So let's talk about what subject to is. So if I go to a bank right now, I'm going to get the market mortgage rate, which is about 7%. It's going to be pretty much, I'll talk about, like I said, Salem, Oregon. I go buy a single family home in Salem, Oregon with a 7% interest rate, say 20% down, 25% down. It is going to be cash flow negative right now, period. Significantly cash flow negative. I can go buy off market right now for below market value. You are still not going to cash flow a single family home. And that probably applies to duplex as well. So how do we combat that? Subject to, what this means is you are literally buying a home or duplex. You're buying a property subject to the existing mortgage on the home. I did a few of these last year. It's really effective. So for example, you might find someone who bought a property in 2020 and they have a 3.25% interest rate on it. In fact, I bought one of these in Sherwood last year at exactly 3.25. they don't have a lot of equity in their home, and they just kind of want to get it off of their hands. So what you can do, and this is not legal advice or lender advice or any of that, I want to be clear, but there's a way to set it up called a subject to purchase where you take over the payments on their loan. So instead of going to the bank and getting a new 7% loan, you take over their 3.25% loan. Now, any of us can go online and pull out a mortgage calculator, but needless to say, that's going to have a massive impact on your payments. So that is one way to go about finding cash flowing rentals still in 2025. The second one is through seller finance. And I encourage you guys to go back to episode 4 of this podcast where I talk about a seller finance deal I did this year. Is my first deal that I did in 2025. But the way seller finance works is, again, you go to a bank, it's going to be 7%. When a seller is financing a purchase for you, the seller is effectively acting as the bank. But the great part about it is the seller can finance the property at whatever rate they want. They're not tied to any of these underwriting conditions or market conditions or anything like that. I mean, I've seen sellers that will finance at 0%, also known as a principal only loan. In the example from episode 4, I got a seller to finance at 4%. But you can negotiate this. The seller steps into the place of the bank and they act as your lender. And with that, you can get whatever rate you and the seller agree on. It doesn't matter what the bank's doing at that time. So that one that I did, again, I've done a bunch of these lately. But the one in episode 4 is a perfect example. Go back and listen to that. That deal never works if I have to go to a bank and get a 7% loan. So both of these strategies, the long and short of it is it's just a way to turn back the clock to those good old days of 2020 and 2021 interest rates. So, this stuff it's not rocket science, but it's not that easy either. I encourage you guys, if it's something you want to do, get with a realtor who knows how this stuff works, and they're going to know the type of sellers that you can go to. It's what I've done. It's what my realtors bring me is they know what Matt's looking for. If I can get Matt a fourplex with a 4% interest rate on a seller carry, he's going to close on it. So you need to get with the right people. I wouldn't encourage you doing this on your own if you're a beginner, but if you get with the right agents, they can tee the whole thing up for you. So that's one way to do it. Another kind of market reality that I've had to face in 2025 is sometimes you have to be okay with a property not cash flowing year one. So for example, I bought a sixplex in Salem and I just bought it with bank financing. I think I got a 6.5% interest rate on it. And the property is actually, I bought it back in November or October, I believe. The property is actually cash flow negative right now. Now, if you're buying your first deal, I don't encourage you to buy a cash flow negative deal. Once you've built up a little bit of a portfolio that cash flows well. I mean, I have a ton of stuff that I bought back in 20, 21, 22 that has low interest rates and cash flows like crazy. So I can afford to have a property in my portfolio that actually loses money month to month because I can offset it with the profits from some of those other deals. But the long-term play with this is I didn't buy this because I wanted to cash flow negative for eternity, certainly. The appeal to it was I got it was a pretty good price because this landlord has not kept up with market rents. So I know year one, okay, it's a little bit rough. I need to budget reserves to make up for the fact that this property is cash flow negative. But year 2, I'm going to be able to do a max rent increase. It's going to start cash flowing. Year 3, I can do another max increase because it's so far below market. I can keep hitting this with rent increases. And the way I look at it is yes, year one, this is not a great deal. But when you extrapolate it out, look at 5 years from now and the rents that I'm going to be able to charge on this building, it's going to cash flow like crazy. So I don't encourage you to do that on your first deal again. But if you've been, I know lots of investors, it's a mindset shift you have to go through. But sometimes it's okay to own the asset and actually cash flow negative for a little bit. I mean, no one, if you're throwing money in the stock market, none of those, pretty much no stock, unless it has a huge dividend, is cash flowing. You're putting money in there every month in the hopes that down the road, you're going to be able to sell it for more. Nobody thinks twice about that. It's just how things work in the stock market. But with real estate, we get caught in this mindset that we have to cash flow. It's not a bad mindset to have. No one's ever going to fault you for wanting your property to cash flow. But I think getting out of this mindset that it has to opens your mind up to some bigger deals. So in conclusion, guys, in 2025, if you want to be able to find cash flow, at least in Oregon, you're probably going to have to utilize seller finance or subject to the two strategies that we went over. And then the second piece is if you just want to buy a property with a long-term vision, sometimes you can be okay with it not cash flowing the first year. So thanks for listening, guys. If you have questions about this, you can reach out. My Instagram, my personal is The Real Matt Cox 4. And then my business Instagram is at Saustown Properties. For those of you that follow, I respond to DMs on there. If you have an episode idea or something you want me to answer, I can do that as well. So hope this helps you guys. But if you really want to do this, I encourage you to reach out to somebody, whether that's me or someone else who's already utilized these strategies, and they can point you in the right direction. And you can buy rentals in 2025. Don't be sitting on the sideline waiting for 3.5% rates to come back, because I think if you do that, you're going to be waiting a long time. Thanks.